So what I'd like to do is talk to you about how, and I'm actually going to focus on the online environment because that's what I thought might be most useful. And how I'm going to do that is to show you what I did in my course. This is a course I run in the postgraduate program in public health and health management. It's also in the clinical education program. And I've been running it for a while now, and I guess it sits in the small group session in that I rarely get more than 30 students, and more likely I get around sort of 15 to 20, and sometimes even less than 15. Okay, it's what we call a blended course. So when I first was given the course back in 2003, it wasn't. It was what I referred to as kind of the old-fashioned delivery mode, which we talked about this morning, whereby you get students in for a workshop, you give them a course back, and off they go. And clearly, particularly with postgraduates, what a waste! That they just sort of go off then, and all this valuable interaction time is lost. So quite quickly I set about putting an online component together, and I used what was available to me then, which was the university supported tool, which is WebCT. Then of course it became Vista. The other thing is about the course notes. In our school we have quite copious course notes, and they're written in the style of what we call tutorial in print. So it's like I write my course notes that way, many others do too. It's like you're chatting to your students. They're not formal, it's nothing like a textbook. It's really like you're there in the classroom chatting to them. So my course notes are very comprehensive, and they include almost everything in the course notes. But in addition to that, we have the 2 or 3 day workshop, course notes, and this online. So between 2004 and 6, that's how it all looked. Now, when I put together the online component, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this model. I'm sure many of you are. For those of you who are not, Julie Salmon came up with this model of sort of for the learning and teaching online, and she talks about there being 5 stages of development. So when I put my stuff online back in 2004, I used this as a way of going about it, and I'll show you how I've kept that going. Okay, this was a fairly typical evaluation of my courses up until that time. So basically, to summarise what it says is, typically I would get really, really positive feedback on the workshop itself. Students obviously had a great time. They talk about how active it was, how engaging it was, how they learned so much. It was always, these are kind of quite mild comments. Some of them were just really kind of, blew me away in terms of how much they enjoyed the workshop. At this point, I must acknowledge my colleague Chris Hughes over there, because Chris comes and does a part of it in the workshop, and it's always a really fabulous bit of the workshop too. So Chris helps me out, of course. Anyway, the students would talk about how applicable it is to their work and how much they love it. However, when I asked them about the online component, I'd get these kind of comments. Now, I should say that not everyone thought this. A lot of the comments were also positive about the online component, particularly when students hadn't had it before. But to me, there was a real dip in enthusiasm and engagement from the workshop to the online component, which I wasn't, happy with. So basically, the students are saying, look, I'm a really busy postgraduate, I can't really have the time to do this. Someone said, because I do certainly put structure in my course in terms of dates and so on. One of the students says, look, I really didn't like the way it was so. I had these deadlines, I almost wanted to chuck it in. And they sort of say, look, is there another way to do this? So when I looked at WebTeacher, I thought, okay, that's what I'm missing here. That's what I really want to use in my course. And the result of doing that was this kind of evaluation. It wasn't a lot, it was certainly unmarked bills, so it's okay. But you can see there was a clear, really, and that was just one student comment, there were a lot more very much like that. So this time, this was session 2 last year, I was able to really bridge that gap between the workshop and what happened online. And this is how I think I went about it. This is a screenshot of the Vista part of the course. So if you're familiar with Vista, typical things, that's where students can get the resources, the civil assignments, and normally students would click on there and go into the Vista discussion tool. But this time they didn't. This time, when they did that, a WebTeach screen would come up. So there'd be 2 logins. They'd put exactly the same login to this as they would to this one. And then they'd come to the welcome page, which looks like this. It takes them to what this screen, it's not dissimilar in a sense to some of the things you find in Vista, but the first screen they come to is a notice board screen, which is very much like the announcements tool in Vista. Okay, so this morning a lot of people talked about, when we were doing the other, both in the online stuff and the mini debate, the idea of when we had our affirmative thing about the spontaneity that you can really generate with face-to-face settings. And that's one thing I found Vista didn't really allow me to do. I found I had to put a lot of structure in before I started the course to really make it work. With WebTeach, I found I was able to actually have enough structure to really get things going, but the spontaneity I found was very easy to input. As a teacher, it was just so much easier to use, and the spontaneity kind of came back into my teaching. The other thing was, of course, the workshop's compulsory, which is really important. The course is about designing workshops, so obviously it's very important the students come to the workshop. But also the online component is accessible. It always was accessible, but it's something that's really important as well. But I made it far more active by, I believe, using this tool that was available to me. Okay, the kind of teaching strategies that WebTeach offers for you, and when I say offer, literally, this is a screenshot of within WebTeach. So when you're putting in the discussion, you can see here, you just have to click on one of these. So if you're really prompted to use these sorts of things. So you can see there that they're all really, all sort of strategies that actually really do engage students. So if it's a brainstorm, a task, a voting mode, highlight comment, you can debate. Andrea talked about how she uses debates in case-based formal versus informal and so on. So there's all these things embedded in here that you can actually just use quite easily. Okay, coming back to the 5 stages that Gilly Salmon talks about, and I think you've already talked about it this morning. When people get online, it's really important, just as in a face-to-face setting, when you walk in the room, what you say, your opening remarks are really going to set the tone for how students are going to think, oh, this can be fun, or oh my God, not this again. So it's really even more so online. So the access and motivation stages are all about making sure students can actually get, to the technology, use it properly, and they really need to be motivated. So the blended model works so well because you have the opportunity to have the students in a face-to-face setting. So what I did last year was actually use my workshop much more to inspire students to get online. That was a really important difference, I think. So I kind of made it so they were kind of chomping at the bit to get online. And the other thing was, it's over 2 days, so that after the first day I'd say, okay, go to the computer, make sure you have access to it, see if you can get on, and let me know if not. And that also got over that kind of bridges that when they left, they'd already been on once, and that kind of got them in. The other thing is the use of the gallery. Andrea talked about it in her presentation as well. You can certainly set something similar up in WebCT or Vista, but to have it so easily here in this tool. At the workshop, of course, you spend some time introducing each other, you get to know each other. But what really was fantastic, when I had the gallery going in WebTeach, students put all sorts of things in the gallery that they wouldn't have shared if they hadn't met in the face-to-face environment. We had pictures of pets, pictures of babies, pictures of them in their childhood, all sorts of things. And that was a really good way to help them come up to my next point, sort of about the online socialisation, sharing all sorts of things in the coffee shop, which was really fabulous reading, actually. The other thing, which I'll show you a screenshot of in a moment, is the email alert. This is something I just can't do without as a teacher in an online course. What it means is when you go into when someone posts a message, any kind of thing in the environment, you get an email instantly into your, or not instantly, but soon into your normal email in tray. And by doing that, it prompts you to go and have a look if you want to or not, but I'll tell you more about it in a sec. And the other thing is, across any kind of system, you need to have some kind of warm-up activity where students can have a feel for it before they actually get into the thing. Okay, this is just a screenshot of the gallery. And as I said, it was a terrific tool to use. Students they can click on the button to put the photo in, they can put what they write in the text, and I was really amazed at what they did share about each other, all sorts of things. And clearly the difference between, I'm doing a course right now that I'm running fully online, and it's really dull and boring, because people have one sentence, I'm a registered nurse, full stop. And that doesn't really do anything to promote what you're wanting them to do as a group, get to know each other as a group. But having the workshop first on online, it just makes a huge difference for that. But it's still worthwhile having, even though they've met at the workshop, is my point. Likewise, the coffee shop. Again, they were able to chat about things at the workshop, so they were able to take these things online and continue their discussions about the things online. And this is one of the typical comments of how they felt about the coffee shop. And you can see that this comment really gets you to realise that students completely at home in this online environment and really enjoying, like she's almost looking forward to coming in and reading it before she goes to other activities. Okay, the email alert, just to give you a screenshot of this. What's really good about this is it's prompting you to, okay, look, there's action in my course, but what it also does is show you what they've done, who it was, what they contributed to, and even the first few words of it. So you can instantly think, okay, should I go in and respond immediately because this is quite critical, or can I just leave it for another week, or do I not really bother at all? So it's a really useful tool, and as I said, I would not want to teach without it because it's really, it's just such a helpful thing to just be prompted rather than go into environment, especially something like Vista, that takes ages to download and load up to and so on. And the other thing about it is, you can see a link there. Rather than going twice to log on to get to where they want to go, they just go onto that straight link and it takes them exactly to where they need to go. And you can see the students actually commented on that as well. One of the students said, oh look, this is a bit silly, I've got to do 2 login screens to get into where I want to go. Any ideas? And another student pipes up really quickly, yes, you know, the email alert comes, just redirect it and off you go. Okay, now the other thing, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just give you a couple of the ones that I used a lot. We talked about how students need to feel at home in the online environment, they need to be guided, we need to support them all the way through. The meta comment is a really useful tool for that, and it's a click away. What it does is it indents, it comes in another colour, students see its meta comment, and they can be directed to it really easily. So it's another way you can support students so easily. Okay, so upping a level, remember, it's a developmental stage, so students are now feeling pretty okay in the online environment, pretty happy about everything, so they're now starting to exchange information. So other tools are at your disposal in Web Teacher, things like using a brainstorm. And the nice thing about this is that it's anonymous. So you can do it really quickly, and it's not a screenshot from my course last year, it's a screenshot from the course I'm running now. I actually use it to evaluate the course. So part way in, I just say, quick check-in, how's it all going? And they can anonymously give me their feedback, which is a really good way to check in quite quickly. The other useful thing is we know that a really important part of how students learn is through the feedback we give. So a really useful way I've been using anyway is to make a highlighted comment to give them feedback, and students very quickly can see that's where the feedback comes. I haven't opted in, but the other very important point about how WebTeach works unlike Vista is that the posts are actually chronological. There's no threading that happens, which drives me nuts in Vista. I mean, I just have never got my head around it in all the years I've been using it. So basically, students scroll down, and every time someone contributes, it just is a chronological contribution. Much easier to read. I think my students do too. Okay, so they've now kind of done a few things. Importantly too, I think someone said it this morning, I think it might have been you, Andrew, that it's really useful if your workshop's going really well, if you can make links between the workshop and the online environment. So I always do at least 2 things whereby I get them to start with the workshop and I get them to finish it online. And that allows them to kind of realise that's part of inspiring them to go online, but allows them to make the link between what we're doing at the workshop and in the online environment, and that really does work very well. And the other thing about it is, of course, it's really important to get them to, the main purpose of me using the online environment is to get them to interact with each other and talk to each other. So all of my activities, in a similar way to Andrea, which she mentioned this morning, about reflecting and contributing to other people's work, that's a really important part. So for example, one of the things I do, remember it's about designing courses, they start to draft learning outcomes at the workshop. When they go online, they have to actually post the learning outcomes and review in other persons. They do that in pairs. The other thing is, Andrea, you spoke about groups. You can do groups in Vista, but it's really cumbersome. That's probably why you didn't bother. Whereas in WebTeach, it's just a click away again. So what I do is, when students are sort of early on, I put them in 2 big groups, and they can see what's happening. And within the big groups, I pair them up to do the review of the learning outcomes. So that they're paired, it's like paired work in open groups, which is a really good engaging strategy to use, I find. Okay, then we're at the kind of the developmental stage where students are kind of being much more responsible for their own learning. This is kind of upping now, and you're really at the level where off they go, everyone's feeling great about it. So this is where I would do things like use cases. I put them into private groups. I give them group work to do, collaborative group work, and I eventually get them to reflect on the whole course. So again, WebTeach has this brilliant thing where you just click on it and it goes start a case study. And how it works is it basically, it says the following case. So I begin a case study by saying a few things. I sort of set the scene. And we didn't do it today, but in some cases you might want to start adding information to the case study depending on what responses you get. So you can do that. And this is what I mean by the spontaneity can come back into your teaching. So you can change direction at any time. You can add or not add or change things around. So that's what it looks like. Okay. So the student comment, well, just narrating to the use of case studies, they clearly like doing those sorts of things, and they even mention WebTeach by name, because I think they've clearly got the idea that it's easier for them. Okay, the other really useful thing I mentioned before, smaller groups, it's very easy to make the groups private. So up until now they've been sort of open, larger groups, but it's very easy to make the groups private. And any time you can open them again to make them all the information and everyone can see. So what I normally do is set a task, and each private group does it separately, and then I open them up again and everyone can go in and have a look what's done. And I may or may not decide to get them to review the other group or something along those lines, depending on how they're going. Okay, these are the kind of comments that the students last year in session 2, that was the first time I'd used Web to Teach, this is the sort of thing they said. So they really commented, and this is just a couple of the comments, there are many more like it. So they really seem to kind of get onto the idea of being much more interactive than any other course they've done. And again, Web Teach is mentioned, so clearly it was really a big part of it for them. And the other thing is, the second student here, web anything in big caps, there's a lot of resistance from some students, especially postgrad students actually, web anything they really don't like. Where she was able to kind of get over that hurdle. I think she found Web to Teach is so much easier. Okay, so for me, the things that really made it much easier for me to use this tool was certainly the fact that they're chronological posts. As I said before, Web Teach, I just can't bear using the discussion tool. The threads I find it so complicated, and I've been using it for like 4 years or something. I still haven't got my head around it. I don't like it at all. So the chronological postings is just like wonderful. It's like a breath of fresh air. You can actually think, wow, this is brilliant, I know what's going on now. Now the ease of use, it's just such a simple tool to use. I never actually had a formal, so this is how you do it. I just sort of picked it up by just going in and, mucking about with it. Chris and Lindsay set up a sort of, play tool thing. Test group, sorry, not a play tool. Test group. Yeah. And that, I was able to just kind of do a few things, try them out. It was really easy. As I said, the email alerts, you've got so many other things on your plate. It's so easy to forget to log into this, and plus it's a pain, it takes ages to load and blah, blah. So to get an email alert in your inbox where you're sitting there every day at your desk, right to where you want to go, it's brilliant, really so helpful. And then the other thing is, of course, I'm someone who knows a bit about teaching and likes it, but if you're someone who doesn't and doesn't even kind of think much about a brainstorm or voting or debate or something, it's there all the time in front of you, kind of prompting you, tempting you to use these things. So I think it's a really useful thing to have those. It's like prompts. I see them as prompts. Okay, I'll point you back. So this was a kind of a final comment from a student. It was just posted in the coffee shop, and basically they're sort of talking about the fact that they really feel that Web Teach made it so much easier for their learning. They talk about a new standard setting in Web Teach.
Mindful of case 2, one of the first questions one of my colleagues is going to ask me if I'm telling them is awfully banal, but it's how many hours a week do you spend servicing your 25 students through this, and how many hours did it take you to set it up, and is that worse or better? I hate asking, but I'm being asked to front up my hours to justify my research output on my administrative load. And if I have 2 courses like this, it looks fabulous, but also looks like there's a lot of time involved in chasing.
Setup time wasn't, initial setup time was probably much greater, but the transition from Vista, when I put stuff into Web Teach, was really quite, probably a couple of days really. And how much time I would spend online with that number of students, that's a bit more tricky. One thing I do is, and it's sort of things that come to advice I give to people is, especially if it's a small group like that, go online every day. Like, it's not going to kill you, and it really is. Well, in terms of if you've got that small groups, I know if you've got hundreds of students, that's different. But if you can go online every day, it makes a big difference. So I'd probably spend minimum of an hour a day, probably sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on where they were in the course. Sometimes less, sometimes 5 minutes to look what was there or wasn't there, or yeah. It's not a big load. I really don't think it's a big load. And certainly it wouldn't be any more than face-to-face.
And the initial setup?
A couple of days. Yeah. But the other thing is, I suppose, as I said, the reason I use this tool is because I want to promote interaction. So I'm online a lot more in the first 2 weeks when they come on. It's really important I'm online probably 3 times a day if I need to be, or whatever it takes kind of thing. And basically I respond to every posting when students first go on, and then I start to drop back a bit. So by week 4 or 5, the students are in there, and they know that I'm there if need be. But I drop, my input drops because that's the idea of it. The idea is that I want students to be talking to each other, not to me. And that is what happens. To actually tell students, when you're going to be online. Yeah, that's right. So either you're a person who or you're maybe once a week sometimes. Some of our people who use Vista only in once a week, not. And then students know not to expect immediate response the next day. And the other point is that, yes, it cuts down on your workload in a sense to if you it doesn't ever load up too much when you go in. It's not going to be 50 posts you have to read. You only have to read 2 if you get to go in every day. I personally like it for that reason, because it keeps me up to date and I don't have to kind of suddenly spend 3 hours. That's just a personal preference for how to do it. Yeah.
One of the things we've tried in one of the courses we are doing online is when we divide the groups, we actually ask one student to be facilitating for each week, and so each student actually volunteers to facilitate on a particular week, and that student will also sum up the discussions so that we as facilitators or conveners don't do that work. And we are also tell the students we will only go online once a week, and if you have a question, post it on the coffee shop. And usually a lot of times the questions are around what more sort of around the structure and administrative things, and when they post it on the coffee shop, some other student will answer the question usually. So in this way, we actually cut down on the amount of time we as teachers spend online.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I must say, to me, blended learning is such a great way to do things. I don't like fully online one bit, and face-to-face teaching is great, but there's some extra things you can do online. So I think the blended nature is just a terrific mix of the two. Yeah.
Well, ours is wholly online. We've actually had to, over time, develop a lot of supporting documentation to give students about how to do a report. For example, doing a critical review, they've never done a critical review before, and they may not have even been to university. So we actually need to take the time to have a lot of supportive documentation and be quite nurturing in the first few, especially around referencing.
That's common across all faculties, and there's agencies like Learning Centre that's there to give generic help for all of that.